Hello everyone. I'm Takeshi Kito, Vice Chairman of FinTech Association Japan. And this session is focusing on how can we develop international API ecosystem together. And today we have three panelists from Singapore and Middle East and Japan. So I'd like to introduce three panelists. Pieter-san from AFIN.
Good afternoon, konnichiwa. This is Pieter speaking here from Tokyo. I'm representing here today AFIN, or the APIX platform. Very quickly about myself, I came to Japan more than 30 years ago. I've been working in the financial industry, largely in technology and operations, working for companies like Citibank, Shinsei Bank, and Monex Group. More recently, I've been an advisor to the Innovation and Technology Panel for the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and I have been supporting the establishment of the APIX platform, which I'll be talking about later today. Thank you.
And Hata-san, he's from justInCase, and also he's working for FinTech Association Japan.
Hi, it's Kazy Hata. I'm running a company called justInCase, which is the insurance underwriting carrier, so licensed carrier in Japan, as well as justInCase technology that was established only 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, which is focusing to support the insurers, like including API or tech support. So I guess I can talk about the evolution and the movement, what's going on in Japan. Thank you.
And next is Abe from FinTech Galaxy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Abe Karar. I am a partner at FinTech Galaxy, and I focus mostly on the digital transformation side of the business. I've been in the financial services industry for a good 15 years now, and most of my background has been working in digital transformation and digitalization at institutions such as Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of Montreal, and then most recently in the Middle East, supporting banks like First Abu Dhabi Bank, the AFS, Arab Financial Services. And since working with FinTech Galaxy, we've been doing some amazing work on really expanding the concept of using open APIs. And I'm very excited to be talking to you today about some of these initiatives, specifically one of the most recent achievements, which is with the Central Bank of Bahrain and the launch of FinHub 973, which is an open API platform. So we'll talk about that some more during this discussion.
Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to ask you to introduce your platform or your initiative in your region. So starting from Pieter-san, and then right after Abe and Hata-san, please.
Okay, Takeshi, thank you so much. I'm going to spend a few minutes about what is APIX and what happened. So first of all, a couple of years ago, we were talking across Asia to a lot of people about, what are you experiencing as a fintech when you try to approach a bank to help the bank to go digital? And we got a lot of feedback on that. And one of the key things that came out of that discussion is that a lot of fintechs go through a tremendous amount of time and energy to actually sell something to a bank. And it can take anywhere between 6 to 12 to even 18 months to 24 months before a fintech has established the sales with a bank to deliver things such as e-KYC or novel ways of credit scoring or things like that. And you can imagine if you're a startup that is going to be a tremendous amount of energy that you have to spend to sell something, you're going to make it as a startup. And at the same time, we also talked to the banks, and the banks were saying, well, we have to comply with regulatory requirements around how do we build technology and how we select things. And it takes also a long time on our side, and we also would like to do things faster. But to kind of summarize what's kind of the situation, if we think about the existing legacy banks, they're kind of like pushing an old car along the road. The legacy mainframes or infrastructures have become extremely hard to deal with, and are kind of pushing this car. At the same time, when you talk to the startups and the founders of new startups, they're kind of driving the new fast electrical cars of the world, and everything is very fast and spiffy. But what happens if this fast car goes to the bank? They end up hitting the wall, and basically not much is happening. And this became an inspiration for the APIX platform. And really, really, why does it matter that that fintechs and banks work together? Well, if we look across the region, we really need to have banks lower the cost of manufacturing of their products because they have to reach underserved and emerging customer segments, okay? When we think about the big banks of the world, that's all fine, but across Asia, we have about 1 billion people that are not served by financial institutions, and one of the key reasons is that we have to manufacture at a much lower cost to reach those people. Customers have gone digital though in Asia. You know, we know that most of the people across the region already have a mobile phone, a feature phone, or a smartphone, and basically are connected to the internet. However, we see a penetration of financial services only in the order of 30%, so a huge gap. Also, there is non-financial institutions that have come onto the market that are disrupting the market, and they're providing, you know, finance solutions for micro SMEs, and typically are digital only. You know, they're coming with low-cost offerings. So for a lot of the banks, there's a good reason to do something about it. Then we have most incumbent and rural banks are entirely not digital. If you go and visit a rural bank in the Philippines or Cambodia or whatever, you'll find brick and mortar hard time. Nothing is connected. Everything is happening at the branch. So huge technology gap. Okay, so though fintechs can play a critical role, it has been proven very hard for those fintechs to break through. So what happened was about 3 years ago, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the IFC World Bank people, and people from the ASEAN Banker Association came together and said, we must do something to break this logjam. How can we have this happen faster? We're in the age of APIs, we're in the age of rapid development. Why does it take years and years to do something simple? And that created AFIN, the ASEAN Financial Innovation Network. Today, we're not only focused on AFIN, we're focusing around the world, but we started here in Asia with an ASEAN focus. So simply speaking, what does AFIN do? It takes the broken car on the left and it turns it into a faster car on the right by using all the powers of all the fintechs that are here in the region or globally to basically tech up the banks. Very simply speaking, what does the platform do? Well, first of all, it is a directory of fintechs where fintechs can share what they are doing. What is important to notice here is that they have signed NDAs, so I can talk to all of them without, as a bank, to have to sign NDAs with everybody, which in itself takes 3 months easily. And then the fintechs have posted all their APIs. So if you're on the platform, you can actually try out these APIs. You can directly, you know, using Postman or something, you can send transactions back and forth. There's a test environment. There is a environment that mimics a backend bank so that you can test with the bank. And it has a development environment on the cloud. So you can actually build your programs in the cloud. And wherever you are, you can start prototyping. And the key thing is without having to talk, you can actually put things together very, very rapidly, figure out if you're made for each other, figure out if the solutions are really something that will help you. And then if you figured out that something, yeah, this is interesting, then you go and spend a little bit more time to find out the details and do commercials. So that is really what APIX is trying to do. To be very clear, we're a non-profit organization and we're really there to facilitate this type of interaction. So if you think of APIX as a huge box of Lego blocks made out of little fintech APIs that you can stitch together, then that is the right image for what APIX brings. One thing that we have done over the last year, specifically inspired by COVID, was the start of online hackathons. As you all may know, there is hackathons or tech sprints, as some people call them, happen all over the world. And that you bring a lot of people together, you give them problem statements, and everybody together works on something. But nobody really had done that remotely. So we updated the platform so that fintechs can come together and banks can post their problem statements, and online they can start building things. So the first one we did earlier in the year was sponsored by the BIS G20. We're now currently running a tech sprint for Time Bank and for Prudential. We have done tech sprints for UNDCDF. The whole Hacklerator of the MIS Singapore FinTech Festival runs on it. And this has really become a great way to collectively collaborate online, breaking through the boundaries of physical interaction. This is just a screenshot of the current hackathon running and sponsored by Prudential. And this gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the problem statements. Anybody can go to the website and see those, and gives you an idea as to what are companies looking for, what are the problems they're trying to solve. And this will bring kind of the innovative spirit out. I'd kind of like to leave it here and move on to my colleague next to me, please.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank
now
you.
we understand what API exchange is. So I'd like to ask Abe to introduce your platform. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and Peter. That was amazing. You know, it's very interesting to see that there's a lot of similarities between what you guys are doing and what we're doing. Not to mention, of course, that we also do have an MOU signed, which is really going to help us really build a lot more cross-border collaboration between the two regions. But in essence, at FinTech Galaxy, we developed something called Phoenix 22. And 22 actually stands for the 22 Arab countries. And our main idea was to really try to uplift some of these barriers that exist in the market today. Some of them are very similar to what Pieter had mentioned, especially when it comes to the banks and the fintechs and when it comes to collaboration and so forth. And interestingly enough, our journey started, FinTech Galaxy is only 3 years old, but it really started mostly focusing on hackathon and innovation challenges. And we were mostly doing them, in the, pre-COVID era, on site, and we would have, the people co-located, working together. We would do the pitch offs, etc. But then, as we started to adapt to the new norm post-COVID, we, did exactly what APIX had done, and we launched our virtual, platform to allow us to do innovation challenges and hackathons. And, as it stands, actually, to date, and since FinTech Galaxy launched, we've done 25 of these events. The most recent 4 of them were done on the virtual platform. And then Phoenix 22 started to morph into something beyond just supporting hackathons and innovation challenges. And we partnered up with the Open Banking Project, and we started to bring an entire comprehensive set of APIs, over 300 APIs, and it comes with synthesized data. And this data, we decided to look at the 5 most active countries from a fintech perspective, and we localized the data. So as a developer, as a fintech, or even as a bank who has maybe an innovation unit, when you go to Phoenix 22 and you sign up, it's self-serve, you get access to the developer portal, you get your API key, and then again, very similar to what Pieter mentioned, whether you're using Postman or you're using the SDK, excuse me, you can actually access these APIs and access 5 sets of data that are localized, to Egypt, Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi, and Jordan, which is very interesting because, again, we are trying to cater to the region, not just where we're based right now, which is, in the UAE. And what's happening is, we decided to step it up a notch. And we collaborated with the Central Bank of Bahrain. And, some of you might have seen the announcement that came out on October 20th, where FinTech Galaxy partnered up with the CBB, and we basically launched a new instance of Phoenix 22, and it became FinHub 973, 973 being the country code for Bahrain. And what's very interesting is now we are actually working with a regulator hand in hand. That really adds a lot more, credibility and a lot more empowerment. Now, a couple of things for the audience to know. Bahrain is, one of the leading countries in the region when it comes to APIs. In fact, it's the only country within the MENA region that actually has an open banking framework. And they started this in late 2018. In mid-2019, they mandated that all the banks at least open up their APIs, and they built, one simple API integration, and they connected through one AISP that was licensed through the CBB. And as of November, if I recall, mid-November, they launched a new open banking framework. Now, what we've decided to do, if we've adapted the platform to their new open banking framework, and again, our main idea is we have about 1,500 fintechs, both regionally and globally. About 450 of them are from within the MENA region, and we are helping them connect through this test environment to prototype and validate their solutions with the banks. Now, here's the one last thing I'll say. That is really what we're now doing, which is pushing it up a notch. And I really would love, again, to have more conversations on this, even whether during this session or after, with the audience or with our colleagues on the panel. which is how do we bring this to the production level? How do you have one API gateway that has taken out the friction of integration, so when a fintech connects in the dev environment, they build, they prototype, and when they have been qualified and vetted by a regulator, the example of the CBB, and they get that badge of approval, then connecting to production to a bank that's on the other side of the platform could be as simple as modifying the endpoint and modifying where your code is pointing to. And now you're not using test data, you're actually using data coming from the core banking system of the bank and building the actual commercialization and monetization model into the platform. And this is where we're focused right now. And again, we're very blessed to have partners like the Central Bank of Bahrain and partners like the APIX exchange, because the idea is once we get there, or even during this journey, we can then actually leverage this MOU, this bridge that we built with the Asian market to say, hey, fintechs in Singapore, in Japan, in the region, you can now come and we can focus also on cross-border collaboration and building that interoperability. And I can talk about this, a lot more, but I'll pause here and we'll come back to the topic in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe.
I actually have a question. So you said 22 countries supported by central bank, some of them. What about the regulation? I'm not an expert in that region, but the regulation should be different across the region. It's not a problem for the platform?
That's a very good question. So at the moment, the only country that we've integrated with the regulator, with the CBB, the Central Bank of Bahrain, is Bahrain. Now, the interesting thing is, the next market on the roadmap is Egypt. The interesting thing is, Bahrain and Egypt already have also, between the CBE, Central Bank of Egypt, and the CBB, the Central Bank of Bahrain, an agreement, and they are working on harmonizing and homogenizing some of the regulatory sandbox process. So as an example, the CBB again being the pioneer in the region, when other regulators are trying to build out a regulatory sandbox, they will go to the CBB and they will share knowledge, and us being a facilitator, we're on these calls. So what we're aiming towards, and to the point of your question, is we're hoping to build the concept of licensed passporting. So when it comes, and this is when we're talking production. So if a fintech started in Egypt and went through the regulatory sandbox of the Central Bank of Egypt, and they've actually also vetted and tested their solution through that process, then when they come and approach FinHub 973 that we're supporting, that license can be passported, so long as the two entities have homogenized and agreed on a certain set of regulatory criteria. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, which I think we will delve into more, is really about API definitions. And this is beyond the regulatory side. But we just said Bahrain launched an enhanced open banking framework, and they defined new API use cases, while other countries are a bit behind. So how do we bridge that gap? And that's something that we are currently working through as we speak.
Thank you. It's a very good question, and I think you have the same topic or problem in ASEAN region, but I'd like to address this issue later. So before that, I'd like to ask you, Hata-san, to introduce your initiative in insurance-related APIs or.
Sure.
Yes.
So in my responsibility in the FinTech Association in Japan is in charge of obviously insurance sector. So we are encouraging the insurers to open their API to be connected to the agent, the platform, and the others. And so it's been very painful process, because some insurers are not too much willingly to do so. But most recently, what my company actually started last year, provided our API to the other financial institution, happens to be the insurer, Daiichi Life, last summer. And the Tokyo Marine, disclosed the example. They have also released some of the products API. And so most of the P&C companies are very, it's a very good synergy for their business. For example, if you want to, it's not very good timing, but for the travel insurance, foreign travel insurance, it's very good to have an API for the online travel agency to have an API implemented, so you sell the travel and sell the travel insurance. So very good, like e-commerce, similar. So therefore, P&C, non-life industry, the movement is quicker than life. But for the life side, also most recently, especially the saving insurance product, like investment products, because it's a similarity to the banking API or security API, which is more advanced or quicker. They are in the pressure to provide an API. So it's certainly moving. But however, maybe similar to what you, Peter and Abe, has been discussing, the standardization or each individual. Japan's a little bit closed country. The one regulation there, the big population, the one regulation. But for example, non-life companies like Tokyo Marine, Sompo Japan, MSAD, they all have similar products, but different API or different connectivity. So like a platform, like you are setting up, is very much, I think, needed here. So of course, our company is trying to provide a platform there, like independent agent. But that's kind of one big hurdle for Japanese insurers or insurance industry, insurtech industry, to be more advanced.
So I think there is no interoperability in the industry in Japan.
Right, correct. So some of the insurer thinks that's a competition area. So why do we have to share knowledge if one is more advanced? So that's everywhere, right? But that's you should maybe compete for the product itself, not the connectivity. So that's always very difficult.
So Peter,
that's a very interesting point that you bring up, actually, and I'm very interested also to know, similar to what Peter has spoken about and what I've spoken about, the concept of this platform, and it seems that you started that same concept, and I'm really wondering if interesting thing about Europe and PSD2 and what happened in the UK is it became the North Star. So that became the standard. So as an example, Bahrain, when they started their open banking journey, they followed that standard. I'm very interested to know if in the insurance business, if there is that similar North Star, because I would be very keen to know if that exists, and if it was implemented in Japan, then how can we learn from you to also bring the insurance APIs into, let's say, Phoenix 22. So then it becomes more than just banking APIs, it becomes more financial services APIs. So I'm very interested to know if anybody has some insight on that.
That's right. So the last year, FinTech Association Japan insurance part submitted or wrote a report about the insurance API. But we tried, initially we tried to have a standardization, data format. But we realized after we tried or discussed, we realized it's too early or not much information to be disclosed. So, but globally in the insurance industry, like ACORD, ACORD, I think based on North America, but some Asian branch, they have some kind of standardization. So it is not impossible to have a standard, but I don't think in Japan it's not there yet.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Peter, how did you put everything together in the same platform? In terms of insurance industry, you introduced credentials one.
Yeah. So a few comments on that. So we're one of the things when we talk about fintech or we talk about the finance industry, we tend to always think about payments and things like that. And interestingly enough, the financial industry is a whole lot more complex, a whole lot more evolved than that. But it speaks to our imagination, the wallet, the payment, and of course on APIX. You'll find a lot of fintechs that are active in the retail space of payments or credit scoring or peer-to-peer lending and these things. That's kind of what we see out. That's kind of what we all see. But the financial industry is a whole lot more complex than that. And we were talking a little bit before this session about that. And so what we're doing on APIX is that we're not just bringing fintechs. We're also bringing the financial institutions on the platform to start working with fintechs on problem statements. And we know that some areas are better represented than others. So if you look at, as I mentioned, if you look at, for example, KYC, know your customer, there are so many fintechs that have done something in that space, and there's a reason for it. Every country has a different know your customer problem, so they are attacking their own countries, and there's a lot of choice there. But if you go into, for example, insurtech or regtech, subtech, or in capital markets or other areas, you'll find that there is less kind of fintech available that is API based. There is still a lot of, I would say, traditional technology out there that uses data exchanges or more integrated solutions that are not really open. And that has kind of been the norm, and that was the norm. So we still see some of those, and there's early adapters. But what happens is, for example, I talked about Prudential, who's running a hackathon on our platform right now. When they came onto the platform, they post problem statements, and then suddenly a lot of fintechs and entrepreneurs start reading, hey, these guys need a solution to connect this with this, or they want to solve that problem. And that starts to kind of create its own kind of thing. And what sometimes people also don't realize in the financial industry is that a solution that works here may very well work in another area. So some things may not, but there's also a lot of reinventing the wheel happening. So somebody who solved a problem in the retail space may suddenly say, oh, but I can do that in the corporate finance space, or I can go into capital market space. We also brought we're also bringing stock exchanges into the platform, and we bring others in to kind of stimulate this kind of thinking. Some markets are very specialist, though, and we have to be really, honest to say that the amount of players in that are limited, and they have been out there for a while. So for fintechs to go in there, it's a big hurdle. For a lot of young startups, it's kind of, oh, payment industry, there must be something happening, and people start to think about it. But there's a lot of money to be made in the corporate space and in the capital markets or insurance, etc. That may not be visible to us, but there is a tremendous amount of infrastructure there. So what we're doing is we're bringing all of that together. The platform is designed to be API agnostic, so we really embrace all APIs, and we bring all the parties together. And what we do sometimes do is with a financial institution is we go out hunting for them to say, where is something interesting, and bring everybody on the platform and then have them experiment. Or if we don't find enough, we do a joint hackathon where we're trying to say, just let's broadcast this problem statement and see who is going to help you. And what is really important to notice, though, is we always think about ourselves being in Tokyo or in Singapore or Bahrain. But if there's a lot of places in Asia where people are really struggling to meet anybody. If you're not in a big city, how are you going to meet people? How are you going to connect? And we're also trying to bridge that by doing a lot of learning and training and online seminars and other things to basically get people to think out of the box, think through how can you remotely do things, and start pulling things in. That's also really, really important. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And after developing regional API platform or ecosystem, and maybe next problem with how can we connect region to region ecosystem. So I think you, Abe and Pieter, already signed MOU for cross-regional collaboration. So is there any progress in your cooperation?
So before Abe talks, let me quickly chip in. And I think first of all, collaborating sometimes starts by just sharing experiences. It is also very much true that there's languages, there are cultural differences, there are regulatory differences. So it's not like let's connect everything together. And we were talking about European community is an exception in the sense that it is a community that is a real community that has a top and has a top down, can regulate and do things. In Asia we have ASEAN, but ASEAN is not like the European community. And then most countries are kind of on their own, right? So when we talk about standards in Japan, they don't work anywhere else, and that's true for everybody. So I think really the collaboration is first of all to start sharing experiences. Hey, we have similar problem statements, maybe we can tie up. I think standardization of APIs is very, very difficult. Unless you're in a very small community. But for example, in Japan, we have a couple of hundred banks. In Asia, it's thousands of banks. And when you start to standardize, you say everybody has to be on this thing, you create an opposite problem. There's the problem of trying to standardize for the sake of standardization. And I think Eba was talking about it. If we have a gateway, or we can translate, or we can coexist, it is much easier so everybody can grow at their own pace and come on board when possible. And we don't necessarily have to talk all the same language. We can have our own languages, but in the middle we can exchange in ways that are maybe meaningful from a business point of view. So I think that is kind of how I see collaboration. And of course we have been working with our brothers and sisters in FinTech Galaxy to share those experiences. Sometimes we cross-market or cross-do things. But I think, we think there's still a lot of room for really starting tying things together. And I think also, we both are 3 years old. We're like little toddlers running around, so to speak. and we first of all have to figure out how to do our own potty training before we can go outside. So there's a lot of room for opportunity for improvement there. But Abe, how do you see this?
I love that analogy, by the way.
That's
I echo your comments. The thing is, the spirit of collaboration is there, and it's always been there, and that's why such bridges are put in place and such MOUs are signed. But to Peter's point, sometimes it's also the level of maturity, and APIX was more mature than we are when it came to APIs, because again, we only started the open API journey at the beginning of this year with COVID versus, APIX, that's where they were born, is in this API era. So there was a lot of, to Peter's point, a lot more of opening doors, so to speak, and introducing fintechs and, reaching out and, we have this problem statement, what kind of fintechs you have. And it was more of think of it as a manual process that is now gearing up to become more automated with the whole open API platforms. And what I do love really is, after, this session, really substantiating my understanding around that there are a lot of similarities in the concepts of, API specifications, published developer portals, virtual hackathons, yet there are still some differences because of the fact that there are still some standards, even if, some companies or countries, I should say, will follow PSD2 or the UK standard, but then there's the Berlin Group standard, there's the Polish standard, etc. So even, from a standard perspective, there are differences. Now you take it a step deeper at a financial institution level, and you're absolutely right, Peter. Like, I'll give you an example. In Bahrain, even despite that they always had a standard and it was published, now we are in the conversations. We identified some strategic partners, the likes of Bank ABC, the largest bank in the kingdom, BISB, an Islamic bank, or even Benefit, which is the main payment and KYC and credit bureau. And even now realizing that the API definitions are not the same, and it's because it was enforced and you have to connect. So banks, depending on their level of maturity, they just needed to meet the requirement. So they just did what they needed to do, and they plugged in and they checked off the box. Now that we're saying, okay, it's been a year, the regulation, the framework has been revised, and now we are going to standardize, and we are coming in as a technology partner to the Central Bank of Bahrain. We're realizing that even the API definitions are not where they need to be with some of the players in the market. So I think it's going to be probably, in my opinion, another, I don't want to say like a couple of years, I think a year reasonably, just for a country like Bahrain. The rest of the region, it might be a completely different story. But it's also a very interesting thing, I'll say, about the learning between the different countries, because now I know, for example, the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia, previously known as SAMA, is now going through the process of building out their open API and open banking standard. And although some banks may have already decided to get ahead of the curve, but at least once the regulation goes out, it will become kind of like a fresh page, and all the banks will start from that same point and will start to build with a more common understanding and a more holistic understanding. But, just all in all, I can say that, despite the challenges, the opportunities are phenomenal. And I do see that within the next, couple of years, we'll be seeing like some actual collaboration between fintechs and financial institutions, and really bridging the gap in terms of, what might be lacking in one region and abundant in another region, and really facilitating that type of interoperability and that support between the countries.
Thank you. And another point I'd like to address is partnership with the government or central banks you mentioned. And how about the situation in Japan and the ASEAN region. Is there any government support took place in this year under this situation?
Yeah, sure. Maybe related to the previous discussion, I'm sure as a conclusion, the government or regulator support is definitely needed because so Japan is maybe pretty much somehow automated. So the problem of like we have a credit card, so no payment app problem. You see what I mean? So if you don't have any bank account, credit card, so like China, okay, Alipay. But we have something already non-paper based. And then so it's a kind of getting legacy. And then no insurer or others have motivation to rebuild it. So API, current system, paper. So if you are using paper, easy to set up, step up. So nobody has big motivation. So the regulatory support is definitely needed to almost compulsory to step up. So we're talking to the regulator, and then they are supportive, but it's sometimes very difficult to just let them say what we want to hear. So, but I think it is a matter of time that they become more aggressive or compulsory.
I just want to add on to Hata-san, just if we look at regulators in general, but if we look at Asia specifically, I think the old-fashioned, the image of the regulators was very much protective of the industry, slow-moving, not very innovative, and in general very difficult to newcomers in general. So that image still is to some extent true. And if a regulator gets angry, we can have a very good discussion around that topic. But really, what has happened is over the last years is, and I think Singapore was kind of the initiative taker in terms of that in Asia, by being very proactive. They appointed the chief FinTech officer. They set up an innovation office. They started to aggressively drive the agenda instead of protecting the banks. They were saying, look, you guys are a hurdle for our industry to grow. You must modernize yourself. With your modernization will come new technology, new opportunities. The economy has to be driven. Now with COVID, we see that across Asia, it's not if we're going to go digital, it's now when you're going to go digital. It's become critical. So I think regulators have latched onto that and starting to say, wait a minute, we're kind of in the critical path here. We need to actually stimulate things. And it was only a few weeks ago, I was on a panel together with the regulator of the Philippines, I believe it was Director Joyce, and she talked about that in the Philippines they have 30% of financial inclusion only as of today, and they want to bring it to 70% over the coming 3 years. Now that's 40 million people have to be onboarded. So suddenly the regulators are talking the talk that all fintechs should have been dreaming of, that wow, there's a lot of work to do, because whatever you think, this is not going to happen by Libra or some Revolut or somebody who falls out of the sky and suddenly financial inclusion will happen. This has to happen from the bottoms up. The infrastructures in these countries have to build a lot of capacity, and with that capacity building comes fintech and it comes this opportunity. So I think regulators are starting to adjust to the realities of 2020, and are really starting to kind of think to that. Of course, everything will take its time. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of this and that. But I also think the regulations are going to become more towards each other, as we're all starting to see the same kind of challenges around the infrastructure, but also want to build on the opportunities of that. And I think, Hata-san was talking about it. This is not about, putting controls on the communication. You want to put products on that, but we should have a highway that is safe and secure to be used, that is standardized, that we can count on. And then on top of that, we should innovate. But the people that have the highways should start to allow everybody to be on that highway. And I think in Singapore, there was an announcement, I just saw that last week. I think the banks have a network where they send money to each other, but they opened up that network for all fintechs to use. So in Japan, that would be Zengin would open up for all non-financial institutions and stuff like that. So there are things are happening that I think are very encouraging, that will bring that, bring that, the regulations are going to go from protective to innovative to supporting the economy, and of course protecting the customer, of course protecting the financial system. That's important, but in a very different mindset. So that's my short take on that. And maybe Abe will reflect similarly or not for the Middle East.
Actually, you nailed it right on the head, Peter. I'll give you an example. The Central Bank of the UAE just announced that they are starting a fintech office. And it's interesting because you guys might be, Shupo Lee, who is part of HKMA, Hong Kong Monetary Authority. He moved to the UAE, and now he's spearheading this initiative with the governor. But it's very interesting because that fintech office is stood up to focus on research, advisor and support, fintech interface, so supporting the fintechs. It has a talent development aspect. It has a collaboration and liaison amongst all of the different, let's call them fintech entities like the ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Markets, DIFC, the Dubai International Financial Center, and the fintech hive there, and really harmonizing, the type of offshore, onshore type of activities from a fintech perspective. And then last but not least, also focusing on cross-border collaboration. That in itself, the fact that they've invested and they've brought on board a consultancy and they're starting this office is exactly what you just said, which is the shifted mindset. And now the mindset is, you know what, this is no longer a luxury, this is a must. And it's a must for the economy. It's a must to really move away from the oil-based industry to a more, knowledge-based and talent-based and more of this, API or gig economy, however you want to look at it. So it's just very interesting that it's now that mindset shift is there because they realize that if we don't do it, our country will not be able to sustain in the long run. And of course, we're seeing the same thing, FinTech Saudi working with the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia. So a good example is, again, a government entity known as Munshaat. We are collaborating with them as we speak. We're working on a full year accelerator program to also help the fintechs. And again, Bahrain, the FinHub 973 as an example. So you see it across the board. The regulators, they're still wearing the hat of, I have to protect, the financial well-being of the country. But now they're realizing that, guys, it's no longer fintechs versus banks. It's no longer keep the fintechs, compress them. No, we're now actually opening doors for them. We're helping them grow the economy. We're helping them help consumers have better financial inclusion, better financial literacy, etc. So it definitely is a common theme across the board, and it's very refreshing, to be very honest.
Thank you. And yeah, we have really so many insights from this discussion, and I think there are still so many things to be discussed. But unfortunately, time is running out now. So I'd like to keep collaborating together, and let's many things happen next year. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.